Henry,
Am I there?
you are there. You are with us. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for bearing with us. Henry is a bit of a legend when it comes to residential property, so I wanted to get him on tonight's live, and I promise you it will be worth it. If you haven't heard the original episode of Real Money Stories, my podcast that I did with Henry last year, it's an absolute hoot. Brilliant. Go and listen to it. I love listening to anything. This guy, you'd want him for a dinner party. He's that funny. No. So Henry, thank you for joining us tonight.
Absolute pleasure. It's lovely to be with you. I'm so sorry for being so old that I can't make Insta-chat work, but it's an absolute pleasure. It's a first, and I feel a decade younger already.
Don't worry. Yeah, well, don't worry. Someone's just sent me, believe it or not, who I did a little favour for, 6 bottles of vintage cider. So I thought it was a router for a new broadband connection, and I was almost in a kind of way a bit disappointed. But no, it's very nice of them. All organic, of course, so that's fine. The fact it's 9% volume proof is irrelevant.
Wow. Anyway. Yeah, no, exactly. I've stocked up just in case it's important to do so. I hope it's not too early in the evening for everybody.
No, not at all. It's never too early, Henry.
Yeah, well, good health to everybody. I hope everybody's well, safe and warm.
Good. Well, look, Henry, before we get into, I thought what we would do is we do 3 things. First of all, any of you out there have got a question about buying or selling a property, whether it's the house that you live in, house you want to buy, a house for property, for resident investment purposes, whether it's for holiday let, or you want to help someone in the family, or you're dealing with a deceased estate or something, whatever it is, put the question in and we'll try and answer as many as we possibly can. I've got a few already that people have sent in before the event, so we can ask those anyway. But I thought what we do is 3 things. Good to see you. Lots of good people joining. Nice to see you all. Thank you. Lovely to see you. Thanks for turning up. So what I thought we would do, obviously, Henry can just explain how long he's been involved in residential property and what he does for a living, just so you understand where he's coming from. It's a different perspective. Then what I thought we would do is just touch on Henry can explain what drives property prices and just really be clear about that. And then hopefully, because he knows what's going on, just tell us where those factors are that affect property prices, where we are at the moment and where we might see those going. He's not going to be professing to know exactly where things go, but he's going to give you some parameters. So you've got a feeling whether you're buying or you're selling, or whether you're involved with someone else or whatever who's doing that you've got a sense of what direction we're going into, given a historical perspective. And then we're going to answer any of your specific questions, as many as we can. So, Henry, fire away. So if you just explain to people what a buying agent is.
Okay, so potted history. I am, in the eyes of the law, an estate agent. I just happened to look after buyers rather than sellers. My day job is acting for people who want to find a home, but who understand that in the process of doing so, they are inevitably going to get emotionally invested in that property, and they would like somebody to sit perhaps on their shoulder to guide them through the process, to help them to make sure that what they're doing at least makes sense to them, and they understand the ramifications of what they're doing. Most people's purchases, as we all know, their single biggest purchase is usually a house. My clients are typically spending somewhere between £500,000 and £50 million, and my job is to go out there, represent them, help them understand where they should be looking for what they're looking for, help them to understand, importantly, what they might look to compromise on. Inevitably, what they want probably doesn't exist, or if it does, it will be beyond their budget. Even my clients with £50 million to spend have to compromise. It's that difficult to find utopia. Lots of people start off looking for the equivalent of a thatched cottage on the Mall in London with a budget of 250,000. Clearly, that's a big ask. I'm not a magician. I'm somebody who understands the market. I've done it for 37 years, unbelievably. I started off at Savills, worked there for 10 years, learnt the trade, then went on to Stratton Parker, 2 big national firms. But my day job is interpreting and understanding what estate agents are saying. Remember, estate agents, of course, do a phenomenal job, but they're not brokers as they are in other parts of the world. They are there, they're paid by, and they represent one party, almost invariably the seller. And as a result, although lots of people mistake the estate agent for being a broker, trying to come up with a mutually unsatisfactory deal, inevitably, because they're acting for one party, their responsibility is to that one party. And my role is to sit on the other side, looking after the buyer, talking them through the process, making sure that what they're doing makes sense, and that whatever they want to spend on whatever it is they want to buy, they at least understand the implications of it. I'm a huge believer in people buying houses, not just commercially because that's my business, but it's where we all make memories. It's where we fall out, we argue, we meet friends, we debate, and where memories are made. And it's really important that people can find something that works for them. Often if it's something they can buy, but not always, perhaps it's something they want to rent. And the UK property market, the English market in particular, is a complicated place. There are a number of things that are easy to trip over in the process. And if you're not doing it every day, as estate agents are, they may not be your intellectual equal, but because they're doing it every day, all the time, they inevitably understand the tricks of the trade. And trying to help people do that and understand it is my function.
Yeah, and it's a very good point you make there. Before we move on to the next part of that, I'd like you to address is that there's what we call an asymmetrical relationship between most people who are buying or selling a home, even if they do a couple or 2 or 3 in their lifetime, and professionals who are doing it for a living. Okay, it's a bit like you might have once done a little bit of work on your car, but you don't do it all the time, so you don't really know what you're doing. You can do very basic jobs like change a bulb or something. So it's that asymmetrical relationship. So Henry, do you want to just remind everyone what are the key factors that influence the price at which properties get bought and sold? Just to remind us all the key factors.
Classic mistake that lots of people make. We try and simplify it into simple supply and demand. And of course, the number of homes that are available and the number of people looking for those homes does have an impact on the competition that there might be for a property. But fundamentally, house prices are based on the cost and availability of credit. If you can borrow more money, more cheaply, people tend to use that advantage to compete with other people to buy the property they want. What we're concerned about at the moment, and what we're all watching out for, is whether lenders are going to get more cautious about the amount of money that they're lending to people. We all know that it's difficult to get a mortgage. Goodness knows, if you're a first-time buyer, the average age now is getting on for 35, because you've got to build up a huge pot as a deposit, but you've then got to qualify for that loan. You need a squeaky clean credit history, something that is important that people understand they need to polish and look after and nurture. And then they've got to find a lender who's going to look at their circumstances. If they're self-employed, that's going to be harder. If they have a significant part of their remuneration that comes as a bonus, some lenders are now taking a slightly dim view of that. If they're getting help from the proverbial bank of mum and dad, again, some lenders are starting to row back on it. But on the other side, we've got lenders now looking at increasing the mortgage term. So they're making mortgages available, not as you and I, when we started, over 25 years, but perhaps over 30 or even 40 years. That helps people to keep down the cost every month of what they're paying. And one of the things that's interesting to note about the new generation, my kids are 23 and 20, they look at house prices on the cost of that home every month, a bit like buying a car. What is the monthly repayment? They don't look at the total capital expenditure. And that, again, is something that I hope this evening we might encourage people to look at, that total sum. You make money when you buy a property, not when you sell it. When you sell it, you need somebody else, not just to fall in love with it and share your dream, but have the ability to pay you enough money to be able to encourage you to pass it to them. When you buy a property, you're the only one that needs to make the decision. You don't need anybody else's input other than the mortgage lender and a valuer if you're having a mortgage at all. And that's what is making this particular market, in the middle of a lockdown, in the middle of a pandemic, so difficult to judge. The cost of credit, its availability. If they lend you more money through schemes like Help to Buy, we've seen the stamp duty holiday. I'm sure we're going to talk a bit more about that this evening. These are things that help people to provide them with more money, and they're understandably using it to compete with one another. That's what's driving up the prices. The numbers this morning from the Nationwide, house prices last year up 6% in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of an official recession. No one was expecting it, or very few people were expecting it, but that's what people need to concentrate on.
Now, you make a point, just before we move on to kind of where the factors are now, that there is what we call a mental accounting problem in the way that people think about buying houses. So, for instance, if I said to you, you could save £20 by you go and get your petrol just half a mile down the road, you'd probably go there, right? But when it comes to buying a house, we either, because it's a large ticket item, we are quite happy to concede you know, 6 or 10 or 60,000 or 600,000 on a house because of the size of the house. Whereas, you know, I'd fight a man in the street for a tenner, right? It doesn't matter what it is.
You're
So
so right.
the point is that we when we have big ticket items, we get very blasé about, oh, an extra 10 or 15,000 or 20,000 or 50,000. And we tend to look at it in terms of monthly payments, as you said, whereas actually we've got to be thinking about, what are we paying for the house, and will someone else buy it off us for at least that amount or more at some stage in the future? So, Henry, tell us about where you see the current trends at the moment in terms of these factors that are driving property prices, and what different paths it might take over the coming months. Because people, I know obviously your houses are long term, but if you're going to buy a house and you might have to move if you're young in 2 or 3 or 5 years time, that could be an issue, because you and I have both been through property crashes, haven't we?
Absolutely. I mean, the most frequent excuse for paying a lot of money for a house that I hear is, well, I'm going to live in it for 10 years or possibly forever, and therefore if it's over that period of time, it really doesn't matter what I pay for it. But you're absolutely right. It matters hugely what you pay for it. If you buy it sensibly, cunningly, cleverly, and if you pay as little as possible, then whatever happens in the future, you're either going to make more profit or you're going to be protected if life changes and things go against you.
Make smaller loss, yeah.
Absolutely. Like you, I've got friends who will drive 30 miles to save 10p a litre when they fill up. But unbelievably, despite the fact that the Halifax Building Society, for example, are predicting they expect house prices to slip by perhaps 5% this year. Their parent, Lloyds Bank, in their annual report last year, talking about their downside being as much as 30% fall in house prices. These are not they're not things that people are taking account of because they say, well, I'm going to own it for a long time, so it doesn't matter. It absolutely does matter. And in a rising and falling market, and particularly in an uncertain market as the one we're currently witnessing, these are really important things for people to understand.
Just a quick one. If you've got questions, I've seen the questions. We will get to them, but I just want Henry to just expand a bit more on a few things. We're going to answer your questions, as many of them as possible. Put them in the comments box, and we will try and answer them. So, Henry, just tell me what you think overall. What are the scenarios that we might have? Let's say a kind of worst case scenario, a medium scenario, and an optimistic scenario, if I can do, and what kind of that means to people who are likely to be listening and watching this and on the replay, in terms of their decisions to either buy or sell a house, whether that's for their own home or for a buy-to-let or an investment purpose.
Okay, if you want the optimistic view, ask an estate agent. Their glass is always half full. They're always going to tell you that property, if you hold it for long enough, always goes up in value. Property is the only asset class that does not carry a health warning. Past performance is not a guide to the future. Every other asset you might purchase will come with that kind of warning, but residential property does not. If you want the optimistic view, we're not making any more of it. There's no more land. We're not building houses at a fast enough rate. Surely, to goodness, we can expect house prices to keep going up, not necessarily as fast as they have over the last 10 or 20 years, but surely we can expect house prices to increase in value. And who knows, that may indeed come to pass. However, there is a part of the United Kingdom, which you know full well, and I'm sure several viewers will and listeners will be aware of as well, where if you'd bought a house in the summer of 2007, today it would now be worth 40% less than you paid for it.
Yes.
House prices can go down, and it's a shocking thing for many of the younger generation to appreciate. When you factor in inflation, we did some research at the BBC looking at house prices across the UK. Factor in inflation, and 52% of homes are worth less than they were 10 years ago. It's only in small pockets, principally London, much of the southeast, where house prices are worth more. In real terms, a little bit more. In actual terms, in London, the inflation has not quite been double. You can still make money in property. You can still improve property. You can still do things to it that will make it more desirable and therefore more valuable. But it's really important that people understand that the price of houses is not a precondition. It's not something that we can utterly be confident and say is going to go up. What could happen? Well, my view is that the market is going to soften over the next 12 to 18 months by somewhere in the order of 5 to 10%. At the moment, we are missing roughly a third of the total number of houses that would normally be for sale. That's about 250,000 listings that would be on Rightmove or Zoopla or on the market if you were to go and search on those big websites today. That means that if you're looking for a house today, it feels like there isn't much choice, because there isn't much choice. The people who own homes are typically not old farts as old as me, but they're older, an older demographic. People like us are concerned about our mortality. We don't want strangers coming round our house if there is a risk, however small, that we might bluntly die as a result. And therefore, lots of people who are discretionary sellers are talking to estate agents. They're getting their properties prepared for market once the lockdown ends, and once we start to see the impact of the vaccine and what that does for people's psychology. If things revert in April or May, then I think we're going to see a bigger increase in that volume. It costs nothing to put a house on the market. An estate agent will put it on for you. They'll quote whatever price you instruct them, because without it, they don't have any stock. So we can expect more homes to come on the market. And then what happens, what buyers' appetite is going to be really interesting. I think people will continue to buy and sell. There will, as there is today, be a market. But my view is that over the next 12 to 18 months, things are going to slip probably a little bit compared to where they've been through 2020. What could happen? It could get properly miserable. There are hundreds of thousands of people today who are earning 80% of what they were earning 12 months ago. Lots of people still in one of the government's furlough schemes possibly have been made redundant. They just haven't been told yet. Yeah. We've got to pay for this pandemic. It's cost billions of pounds. We're arguing within our industry about whether we should extend the stamp duty holiday, for example, an initiative that's done a great deal of good for confidence, got lots of people moving again. That's important for the high street economy and the wider economy. But it's cost £3.8 billion. Now, yeah, there are an awful lot of people who would say, if we've got that sort of money that we can spare, what about cladding? What about first-time buyers? Yeah. What about people who are homeless? What about people who are waking up? 100,000 kids this morning who woke up in bed and breakfast style accommodation. Lots of other pressures on government to solve issues that are very real for a lot of people. So, in summary, I don't think that that's the scenario, but it could happen. I don't imagine that houses are going to maintain their luster. The nation's enthusiasm for houses shows no sign of diminishing, but I don't think we can confidently predict that house prices are going to go up over the next 2 or 3 years by anything like what's happened before. In fact, if they stay the same, that we've probably had a result. There are still enormous numbers of people who are priced out of property. The dream of home ownership is impossible for hundreds of thousands of people. So my expectation is that we'll just bubble along, prices will slowly dip, not because people have lost their enthusiasm, but because lenders, talking about what we were a moment ago, their enthusiasm to lend will diminish slightly. It's not that they won't be keen to lend, but they'll be more cautious about to whom they lend.
And that's a very good summary. So I think really what we're saying in summary there is that obviously no one knows. We can't see tons of upside. And we can't necessarily see an Armageddon because of the other supply and demand issues and the fundamentals. But we are in a situation where as a couple of the questions, which we'll get to in a minute, are going on about, it's very difficult to buy in London, or their salary can't reach it, or they don't want to do a 45-year mortgage, or whatever it is. But it's really driven by that part of the market that needs borrowing. So Henry and I are in a fortunate position. We can buy houses cash if we want one. We're not saying it's brag. We're just saying we're in that stage of our life when we can buy a house cash. So mortgage is not a constraint for us. But when most people, about a third of houses are bought with a mortgage, and so it's what the mortgage company says that really matters and that drives that part of the market. So I think the point is, if you're buying and selling, what I think Henry and I agree with him is that it's an uncertain situation. There are as many pluses as there are minuses, and I think there's going to be very big regional differences in the UK depending on what's happening with employment, with what happens with the pandemic, and also what happens with the cost of capital and the availability of it. So, Henry, let's get through to some of the questions that we've got here. We've got tons of questions, so let's get through some of them because that's why everyone's here. And thank you everyone for joining tonight. So I had a couple that came in earlier. One was, what's your view on someone who's got a buy-to-let with an interest-only mortgage? Let's assume it's quite a high amount of the value of the property. What's your thoughts on someone who's, let's assume that they're going to keep that one. He didn't say in the question, let's assume it's a long-term investment. What's your view on a buy-to-let interest-only mortgage, which let's say is quite a high proportion of the property value?
Well, forgive me if I'm not specific about that particular point just yet, but I'll come to it, I promise. I think that unless you are a banker there is nobody who's less popular than a buy-to-let landlord at the moment, as far as politicians are concerned. They do, I think, fulfill an incredibly important function. But all political parties have worked out that they can no longer simply rely on taxing people's income to pay for their political promises. And home owners and people who own more than one home, whether those are second homes, holiday homes, investment properties, buy-to-let, whatever, they are easy targets. They're sitting ducks. They may ship themselves offshore, but the properties will remain here. I think that if you're thinking of getting into the buy-to-let game, you should think very carefully in 2021 about the merits of it, and you certainly should take advice. There's plenty of it out there before committing. Politicians are going to come for property. There's no doubt about it. Whether it's going to come in a property tax, whether it's going to come in a mansion tax, whether it's going to come in additional stamp duty and transaction tax, I don't know yet. We're going to know more probably as soon as the 3rd of March, when the Chancellor stands up and delivers his budget.
And I think there's a very good... Sorry, go on.
Sorry, no, please.
Well, I was going to say that's a very good point. If there's a fluidity about the taxation, and when we say taxation, not just the initial taxation, but ongoing taxation of property, it's very difficult for you to work out the value if you're going to buy, and it's very difficult for you to know. All you know if you're going to sell is you're selling into the current tax regime. So if you're going to sell, you're minded to sell, probably sooner rather than later is better. Right, as long as you're not desperate and you don't sort of take the first offer, but get a wiggle on, don't hang about, because if we don't think the tax position is going to get better for people who are owning, and if you are going to buy, then probably being patient. What's the worst that can happen?
I think there's an idea that's got some currency at the moment. People, I'm sure, will have read about this online or in the press, of a proportional property tax that would replace stamp duty and potentially replace also council tax. There's no clarity yet on whether tenants would pay that or landlords would pay it, but already I'm sure most people will be aware of the current system, who pays the stamp duty and who pays the council tax. But the talk is that if it were to be revenue neutral, i.e. generate the same amount of revenue that currently comes from those two, that would imply an annual tax on the value of your home of 0.48% every year of the value of that property. I don't think tenants are going to pick all of that up. I suspect some landlords will try and pass some of it on, but clearly there are going to be implications from that. And as a result, it's just one of those reasons why I think people need to be very, very careful about their investment strategy. We've got a classic, something you and I talk about frequently when we're lucky enough to have time to get together, the difference between investing and speculating. Investing is all about the yield that the asset, in this case property, through rent will generate. In property, I think that needs to be 6% or more gross yield, but we've got lots of people who are landlords, deliberate or accidental, particularly in hot spots like the Southeast, who are making do with yields, gross yields of 3 or 4%. It's not enough for the risks that you're taking in investing in property. It's a liquid asset. There's lots of ongoing costs. And I think it's important that people go into it with their eyes open as an investor looking at that yield. If you're looking for speculative gain, hoping that house prices are going to go up, either because you've done something to the property or because the economy has been stoked and as a result house prices generally have risen, that's all very well, but that's the equivalent of you and I going to Ascot races with your pot of money. We might come back in a Rolls Royce with a slap-up meal to boot, but equally there's more chance, I suspect, that we'll come back licking our wounds.
Yeah. Peter, by the way, one of my regulars, yes, it will be. It's going to be on Insta Live, and it's also going to be a YouTube channel. So please keep putting the questions through. Right, Henry, we've got some other questions. So I think the thing about the buy-to-let property, what I would say is this. I'm not keen on people having debt on property. You know that. I've told you that. There's not a get-rich-quick scheme. This is once you start factoring in debt, and the point that Henry made, that there are other risks with property which are not always realised and not always apparent. As I say, if your tenant doesn't pay you and you cannot get them out of the property, and you've got a mortgage, you've got to keep paying it. So it's a negative cash flow. So just as all leverage can help you increase your returns on a relatively modest amount of cash, it can also enhance losses as well. So let's get to some of these other questions now. There was another one also about what do we think about I think the question was along the lines of, if you're going to buy a property for investment purposes, what do you think about a fixer-upper or something that's already done? Well, I'll just answer that first before you do, Henry. We said before it's a very difficult time at the moment to be making investment decisions. So cheeky bids, as you've heard me speak before on Mr. Moneyjar's show, cheeky bids. If you really really want to buy an investment property and you're doing it for the right reasons and you're not full of massive debt and you're factoring in that tax issue that may well come and hit you, then do cheeky bids. And if you can get somewhere, my experience has been big refurbs are an absolute money pit. But going to somewhere that needs a touch of paint and perhaps a new worktop and a few bits and bobs and a few certificates sorted and perhaps the drain cover carried and a little bit of tidying up and just a little bit of a jolly up, that's always the best route I've found, because big refurbs, they always end up costing you a fortune. Any thoughts on that, Henry?
There is still a market for speculation. Adding a bedroom, changing this, updating and modernizing the kitchen and the central heating, bringing it into the 21st century, pumping in proper broadband. These are all things that tenants will pay for, and they will continue to pay for if you deliver them. One of the most remarkable things, one of the things that I rejoice and celebrate, is the relationship that the vast majority of landlords have with their tenants, which is a two-way street. They provide accommodation that people are a service that people are prepared and usually have the ability to pay. But one of the things that's very important for investors and potential investors to remember is that rents are paid from income. You shouldn't be borrowing money to pay your rent. If you are, these are alarm bells should be ringing. And if people are generally earning less than they were, in many cases, I say, tens, possibly hundreds of thousands of people earning 80% of what they were earning just 12 months ago. We're already seeing it in London. Chesterton's, the estate agency, we've got lots of offices across London talking about rents being down 15, possibly 20%.
Yeah,
this is going to change in other parts of the country as well. London doesn't always lead, but it frequently is that bellwether that other people take their cue from. And redundancy, as a result of the coronavirus, as we know, is no respecter of parish boundaries or indeed of metropolitan centres. There may be still something of a hangover in places like Manchester and other conurbations where the buy-to-let market is still perceived to be red hot. But incomes are going to come under pressure, and if incomes come under pressure, so will rents. Be prepared.
So just as a subsidiary to that last question, it wasn't for investment, it was more for someone to live in. So I think the point there is, as long as you're buying for the right reasons, and you've got the price that kind of makes sense and factors in these risk factors which Henry's mentioning, the reduction in rents, the uncertainty on tax, and the general whole thing with the economy, and who knows. I think I would be avoiding what I call putting new roofs on and real big dramas, unless you are in the trade or you've got someone in the family who's in the trade. But something like a Wickes kitchen or something like that, something that's simple to do, then that's I would try and keep it as minimal. Where it's just a bit of love is always better, before you start worrying about doing big, extensions and stuff, because that's the problem there.
Absolutely. Can I echo something you mentioned a moment ago?
Yeah.
Whether you are buying something for investment purposes or for your own occupation, don't be worried about making what might seem like a cheeky or derisory offer. It's something you've talked about many times in the past, and it's something I absolutely believe in. It is an exaggeration to say, as I often do with my tongue in my cheek, if the estate agent isn't weeping when you make the offer, that's how you know you've offered too much.
Yeah.
But lots of people make the mistake of referencing what they offer to the asking price, which is a huge mistake. The asking price is part of the marketing. It's there to tempt you to go and see it. If you have gone to see it, it's done its job.
Yeah.
We had lots of examples this time last year of properties that didn't sell in the first quarter of last year, that were taken off the market when we went into that first lockdown in March, April and May, and were then put back on the market in May, often at a higher price, 10% more perhaps. Buyers came along, they offered 10% less, they thought they were getting a good deal, whereas in fact, they were paying exactly what they would have paid in March. Don't reference the asking price. It's not an indication of what someone will accept. It's not an indication of what the estate agent advised. It's not an indication of what will be accepted. It's there to tempt you, as I say, like good quality lingerie. It's there to tempt you without giving you the whole picture.
Steady, Henry, steady. It's a good family show. So the point here, though, and that's a really good point, Henry, and thanks for reminding me, because I have said that before about cheeky bids, and the price of anything is irrelevant. It's merely it's a pipe dream. It's kind of it's a reference point, all right? you've got to have your own valuation metrics for buying or selling. Okay, you need to understand what that is, take into account what's going on around us, and you'll need to buy or you need to sell. So do that. This other question here says, due to the difficulty of being a first-time buyer in London, would you advise buying up north and letting it out before coming to buying London? Well, I can see lots of problems with that, can't you, Henry? Do you want to just take that one and just answer it?
Yeah, buying your own home is the best, most tax-efficient investment you can make. All political parties still want to encourage you to do it. There are all sorts of benefits from a tax perspective of doing so. The idea that buying something cheap that you happen to be able to afford and renting it out is riddled with potential pitfalls, whether it's capital gains tax when you come out of it, whether it's problems with the management and ongoing relationship with your tenant. Do what you can to afford to buy what you are able to afford in the best location you can. As Phil and Kirsty remind us frequently, location, location, location. What's going to be fascinating is seeing, as a result of the pandemic, whether those locations have changed. Do people want more elbow room? Do they want to be outside? Or do they still want what they wanted 12 months ago?
And here's an interesting thing. I absolutely agree. Don't buy a drama if what you're trying to do is buy a home. And here's the thing, three things I'd say to you. There's been somewhere between 600,000 to 1.2 million people have left the country who were EU workers or non-EU workers who just can't get the work in the hospitality, and they've left London. They've left the southeast, okay? So we haven't got people living out of broom cupboards the same, so that may well help in the due course. The second thing is that you may not be in the right position to buy right now, okay? So don't get worried about what prices are doing now. Think about, do you need to actually get your bigger deposit? Do you need to increase your earnings? Do you need to make sure you get a side hustle? Do you need to find another way of making some extra money on the side? May your circumstances change? Is there a possibility that the family could come up, or a relative might be able to help and come in as a co-owner? Have you looked at all the government schemes? I'm still a bit dubious on those. But so I think the key is, no, we wouldn't be recommending buy a flat up north in a million miles away from you. Get yourself in a position to be able to buy a house, but be patient, because remember, the best way to get the best deal is to be a patient person who has all the information and who has options. So the next question here is, where do you see the buy-to-let market in 10 to 15 years' time? Do you think there will be further regulation?
I have no idea. I don't know what's going to happen in 12 months' time. In 15 years' time, life will be tougher for the investor landlord, without doubt. All political parties are coming for you. We talked about this a moment ago.
Yes.
I don't want to drag it on. The buy-to-let market is fraught with errors. It's best left to people who know what they're doing. If you're unsure or you don't know, leave it alone until there's some clarity.
And let's be clear, there is money to be made in buy-to-let and all different forms of residential property, but you've either got to do it properly as a business and go and get some proper training, or there's plenty of property courses from not the shysters. There's several good courses there and syndicates and people who can help you, but you've got to really be serious about this and not just do it as a half-hearted sort of a get out of jail card. We've got another one here. How long must you wait after cleaning up your credit to buy a house, given your credit is now clean and salary is good enough? For example, if you pay off defaults on a couple of credit cards. Do you want me to answer that, or do you want to answer it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in the mortgage business. Your mortgage broker, preferably your independent mortgage broker, is going to be the person that you're going to rely on. Nurturing and nursing your credit file is absolutely vital if you ever intend to get a mortgage. It's the biggest and easiest way for mortgage lenders to differentiate between people. And if you have missed a payment on your mobile phone bill, if you've been careless along the way, it will take you a good 12 months, in some cases much longer, to get that removed. The important thing to remember is that things do get removed. You can find all sorts of apps these days that will help you understand and manage your credit file. And even if the worst happens, you are made bankrupt. After 6 years, which sounds like a long time if you're 23, but in the scheme of things isn't that long, even after 6 years, that is removed from your credit history. So nurture it, polish it. It's incredibly precious if you ever want to borrow money. And otherwise, no, this is an area that is beyond my pay grade.
Yeah, well, I'm not a mortgage broker, but a good friend of mine, David Hauschel of Hauschel Mortgages, brilliant guy. He says, look, you know, even if you've had some missed payments in the past, he tells me that the single most important factors on people getting mortgages right now, the credit score comes into it, But what really comes into is affordability. So in other words, when they look at your bank statement for the last 6 months and they see either you're constantly going overdrawn and you've got lots of other commitments like cars on finance and mobile phones at £90 a month, or you've got an iPhone X that you couldn't buy yourself, all of these things, gym memberships you don't use, all of this stuff means that you're crowding out your ability to be able to afford a house. So, and making sure you're on the credit on the electoral roll, making sure that, you know, all these basic things. So get your credit reference agency, check what's on your record. The company called Habito are an online mortgage sort of broking firm. They've got a really good facility, worth checking out. I don't get paid anything. There's no affiliate or anything. Just check out their website. They've got a little thing called, I think it's called Mortgage, Getting Ready for Mortgage or something. They've got a little tool there, and it can do a soft thing to tell you how creditworthy you are for what they call prime, super prime, subprime, or don't bother. You know, so just check them out. Habito, very good company. Next one here is, what are the limits and hiddens of using a lifetime ISA for your first residential home other than on property value? So I think what they're saying is there's no limit to what you can use. If you put money into a lifetime ISA because you're under 40 and you put up to 4,000 a year in, you get a bonus of 1,000. Okay, like it's added straight away. As long as you meet the conditions for the value, I think it's 250 out of London and 450 in London. I can't remember what the numbers are, but you can Google it and check that. But basically, there's no limit. If your lifetime ISA, let's say you put it into the Henry Pryor Property Development Fund or whatever.
As you should.
If there was such a fund, and it made 5 times
available at the bottom.
That's
of the
it.
screen.
Yeah. 5 times your bid offer spread of 10%, and it made 5 times the return. Then you can use whatever that is. But most people's lifetime ISAs won't have made that kind of money. But if whatever your lifetime ISA is worth with bonus, you can use towards the deposit. That's my understanding, as long as all the other requirements are met. Now, a regular here, Peter Walter makes the point that a potential wealth tax, as recommended by the Wealth Tax Commission, suggested of 0 to 15%. So, well, if you know that, Peter, then you're a better man than us. But I'm not sure a wealth tax is going to happen in that form. I think we will have other stealth taxes around property, which won't be called a wealth tax, they'll be called something else.
I agree. I think what it underlines, Peter's point is incredibly interesting and very valid. What we don't know is what we don't know. Anything is frankly up for grabs. If you look back over the last 10 years, who 10 years ago would have predicted that a Conservative government or a Conservative-led government would introduce the sorts of changes we've seen to the way that property is taxed, both in terms of acquisition and disposal, but also ongoing for those who are investor landlords. It's extraordinary that this has been brought in by a Conservative government. Therefore, as far as I'm concerned, nothing's off the table.
Yeah. Here's just a little thing for you. Any of you are thinking, so wherever London goes, London Prime, London suburbs, everywhere else follows. There is a school of thought that foreign investors who've got their money from ill-gotten gains from dubious sources will pay any amount of money to buy residential property in London prime areas, right? They don't really care what the taxes are because they'd rather get it there as a sort of money laundering or a wealth transference thing. And that may well be the case. But the problem is, if you start seeing, once the politicians realise that clamping down on tax avoidance and tax, the sort of the laundering of money, which comes through London, if you start seeing there's a lot more money to be had from that and sequestering properties, if that starts happening, then they might not have to tax what we call indigenous people living here quite so much. So I don't know, there's an interesting angle there. It's a story for another day. Now, there's another one here, Henry, I'm not sure you can answer this one. I've heard there is a relatively new regulation or rule that allows a parent to sell their property to their child without paying capital gains. Can you speak on this, please?
I can't, but my understanding is that that's not the case.
Yes. I think what you're talking about there, that's Peter who's asked that question. I think what you're thinking about there is a way of, if you gift someone a property, and you use a certain type of trust, you can hold over the gains. It's a very complex area, but if you gift someone something, you can hold over the gains by using a trust mechanism, but it is very complex. You need to take professional advice on it, and it's fraught with difficulties. There is a way of moving a property pregnant with gains from you as an individual to either a company or to another structure. There's a special section of the Capital Gains Taxes Act, but you need to speak to a chartered tax advisor to see what the conditions are and to ensure that you can do it. But I would suggest you be very cautious with anything to do with capital gains tax, because if it smells or looks or walks like a duck, it probably is. And they are going to be looking at the potential if you try and do anything clever here. And I'm not saying don't investigate it with a chartered tax advisor, a UK registered one, is that they're probably going to come and be sniffing over your neck for many years. Another question here.
It does answer another question. Sorry, forgive me. I've just seen come through. If you transfer a property you own in your own name into a limited company, as many landlords are doing at the moment, whether that's likely to attract capital gains tax on the transfer, which, as I understand it, is likely, but not invariably.
It's likely. It's likely,
but not invariably.
But there are very limited circumstances where the moon is aligned and Jupiter is behind it and Pluto's to the left, where there are circumstances where you can actually transfer that gain into the company. It's beyond the purposes of tonight.
Just trying to answer the questions.
Yeah, that's all right. Leverage can enhance losses as well as gains. People forget the former part. Absolutely, Peter. Let's have a look then. Isn't 80% of what people are earning in real terms little less than usual, as no commuting costs, food costs brought out and clothes, etc.?
It's really interesting. That's a fascinating thing. Lenders, I've been talking or been party to talks and discussions that lenders have been having, looking at affordability, because there is a very genuine argument that if we're not spending as much in our day-to-day lives as costs effectively, perhaps the fact that we're earning only 80% or 20% less doesn't actually make a great deal of difference. It's a debate that's being had. I suspect it's one that will continue to bubble on. But if we think about it in just real terms, if you're earning 80% of what you were earning, you have less money to pay for your rent, regardless of whether you've got other commitments and outgoings. That's something that's going to be taken into account in the total sums.
Yeah, and I think also the point there, whoever said, I think it was Peter or someone said, yes, Peter. I think the point there is that when we come out of lockdown, no lender is going to want to lend you a property on the basis that you're saving a bit of money on commuting and what have you, and not eating out at pret-a-manger. As soon as we have lockdown ends, or when it starts to gradually sort of unwind, and it will do eventually, even if it takes 3 years, but it will eventually, they don't want to have lent on the thing, and you've got stagnant wages, and then your costs suddenly go up, and then you can't pay the mortgage.
Remember, dear viewer stroke listener, mortgage lenders and banks have only just been readmitted into polite society after the fuss of the credit crunch in 2007 and 2008. They do not want to be on the hook for people who might have overextended themselves during a period of great uncertainty. And the reason they're going to be cautious, the reason they're backing down in terms of the offers they're making to people, the reason why we've got almost half as many different mortgage products as we did 12 months ago, is because they don't want to be fingered and pointed at in 12 months' time when people say, but you lent me the money, how was I to know that the property prices were to fall? These people are understandably protecting their downside.
Yes, and their reputation, and they don't want regulation to get even hotter. Peter makes the point. Peter Walton's always very engaged with us on these.
Do we have anyone who's not called Peter?
Yeah, no.
I'm going to change my
he
name
said,
to Peter.
move to Northern Ireland, cheapest houses in the UK, and work remotely like me. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a beautiful place, lovely people.
These houses, it was Northern Ireland. If you bought a house in July 2007, today they are worth 40% of what you paid for them. That's the scary bit. A part of the United Kingdom, now of course also a part of the EU. Let's not go there. But house prices can go down as well as up. And if you've made the move to Northern Ireland, I hope you're making the very most of it. What an amazing, wonderful place to be.
And there's a reason why those prices are that much lower. There is a lot of rain there, Peter. It's a lovely place. There is a lot of rain. To get it first. There is the potential of this EU kind of thing and the Republic of Ireland and etc. And there's the economic issue. Perhaps it is not such an issue now. So there's always a reason. Another question here, Henry, is it better to save for a larger deposit to move up the ladder or make overpayments on my current mortgage?
I think if you're trying to look at where you're living, it's about what you require. So there isn't a natural aspiration to move up the ladder unless you need more space because you've got different changes in your life experience. You might have kids or older kids. Your parents may be coming back to live with you. There's no doubt the bigger your deposit, the more options you have when you come to buy. Paying your mortgage, overpayments on your mortgage, paying down your mortgage is a good thing. It looks good on your credit history. Lenders like to see it. But a bigger pot, a bigger deposit makes a phenomenal difference.
And I think it's a very good point. And I would just, as subsidiary to that, Alexis one who answered the question, is that mathematically paying over the mortgage, okay, and reducing the mortgage means you're going to save on the mortgage at a rate grossed up by your tax rate equivalent to the mortgage savings. So for instance, your mortgage rate, let's just say it's just over 2.1%. Basic rate taxpayer's got to get 2.6%, and a high rate taxpayer's got to have 3.5%. For them to risk-free, tax-free to get the same return. And you cannot get much more than about 0.5 or 0.6 or even 0.8 if you're really lucky on cash. So paying down the mortgage, as long as you don't have any non-mortgage debt and you have an adequate emergency reserve to pay for, like I've just had to pay £400 for some valve in part of our central heating system. And every year there's something in this house. It's like the sort of Titanic, you know, but not on water.
How much of a cushion do you think today people should have if they were able to do so? How many months expenditure do you think is sensible today?
Well, everyone is different and it all depends. But assuming you've got rid of your non-mortgage debt, so that's overdrafts, credit cards, loans and all that kind of jazz, I recommend if you've got very stable job, very stable income as well, because not everyone's, people might have a stable job but not stable income. But if it's a stable job, say you're a consultant in the NHS, you know, working in the COVID ward, you're going to be busy for a long time, right? You believe your income perhaps is going to rise quite quickly, and that's not hope, that's genuine because of your career bands and what have you, then you can afford to perhaps have a smaller one. It might be 2 or 3 months core living expenses. But someone who's self-employed, or where their outlook is a bit dodgy, or their partner might be going off work in a couple of years' time, you might want to hold 6, 9, 12. I hold 12 months living costs, core living costs in cash. Okay, now that cash can be notice accounts.
Where is it?
Instant accounts. Premium bonds didn't win. We're all.
It's not under the sofa.
Oh yeah. No. We use premium bonds as you do, Henry. So look, you can use different cash instruments. It doesn't have to be all in
12 months. You think is sensible?
Well, I have not because I have it's just that it helps me sleep at night. Now I'm saying you need more multiples of core living costs, and even more so when you buy a house, you need an emergency fund because things will go wrong. And when you're factoring and working out the price to pay for a house, whether that's an investment property or a residential house to live in, factor in 10% of the ongoing sort of mortgagee cost stroke rent equivalent as maintenance. Obviously, if it's a brand new house, it's going to be a bit less. You could probably get away with 2 or 3%. If it's an older house, it's going to be 10, 12%, because people don't factor that in when they're working out if it's affordable. So hopefully that answers your question. Overpayments is a good thing. It doesn't matter. It's better than probably holding cash as long as you've got your act together. Now, this one says, what's the difference in impact between missed payments and defaulting? I think the difference is missing a few payments is kind of something you can catch up with. Default means that the mortgage lender has sort of said, no, this is a formal thing now. This is not just 1 or 2 payments.
Missing payments, in my understanding, is something that that your lender is aware of. Default payments are something that they were unaware of, and they've discovered because they haven't had the payments. Yes. That's a big red flag.
Yes, and here's the thing. Your mortgage lender, and this is the same, it is also the case, I know someone who is having problems meeting the mortgage payments on a rental property where he has not got any rent coming in.
Talk to the
lender, have an arrangement with them. And of course, under the corona regulations, we've got this sort of second opportunity where if you haven't used it before, you can have up to 6 months as a holiday. Do you pay CGT if moving property? Oh yeah, we've already answered that one. Let's just have a look at the last few. There's a lot of rain in South Manchester too. Our house prices are still going up.
Buy a brolly.
Okay, let's have a look. Would you say it's good practice to not go for the higher price the bank is offering to lend you, or would you say go for as high as you can, knowing your wage goes up yearly? I'll answer this, and then I want to hand it over to Henry, because he's been with all sorts of people helping them buy houses. You buy the house that you can afford, not what someone is prepared to lend you the most money to, because they're not interested about your financial well-being. They are not interested about the crap that life throws at you. They are not interested about hiccups along the road. They're only earning out of you, and if it all goes wrong, can they get their money back without too much hassle? So you've got to borrow the money that makes sense. So my advice, fixed rate, a 15-year loan, no more than 25% of your take-home pay. It's simple as that. Now, on that basis, most houses aren't affordable. So you've got to start being a bit clever, and you've got to think, what do I need to do to be able to afford the house that I want? Do I go for auction? Do I go to people who are estates where someone has died? Do I just keep putting cheeky bids for half the price? Whatever you need to do, you buy the house you can afford. Henry.
Listen to this man. He speaks a great deal of sense, and I can't improve upon it.
Yeah, sure. And it may be also one of the things I would say, you might need to increase your income to be able to afford the house and the borrowing that makes sense. You know, just because they'll lend you 300,000 on a salary of 38 doesn't mean that's right. You might need to get yourself up to 50 or to earn 12,000 on the side. Do lenders like you overpaying your mortgage, or is it bad because it makes the bank less money? No, they love it. They love you overpaying the mortgage. No, they don't love it. When it comes to you being reassessed, they can see that you are reducing the balance, and there is a history, there's a digital trail. It becomes more relevant when your new property you're looking to buy or your new mortgage is a bit might be on the edge. Henry?
I agree. If you can overpay, it's sensible to do. It makes sense in terms of the total you're going to spend, and it also looks good when it comes to your next application.
Yeah. There's another interesting question here, and I think I know the answer, but I'll let you answer it. At what property value would you suggest engaging a buying agent, and how do buying agents charge? Is it a percentage of property value, or is it just Henry?
Well, for me, my fees are huge. I earn an incredibly good living from doing this. I think I provide, and my clients tell me they get incredibly good value for the money that they spend. But it, by and large, makes sense for people who are spending over £300,000. Anybody, and arguably first-time buyers spending the least amount, are the people who can benefit the most, because I've done this over 1,500 times, now nearly 2,000 times in my career. I've learned things as I've gone along that I can share, and we have regular events like this to share that kind of wisdom. But buying agents traditionally charge, as estate agents, as selling agents do, a percentage of what you spend. Most buying agents have their fees on their website, so you can go and look and see. But what you're getting is somebody who's going to be able to give you a dispassionate, detached view about what you're doing, hoping, as I do, that you're going to fall in love with something, and then making sure that when you do so, you don't make the mistake and commit and go all in too soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And on Henry's website, henrypryor.com, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. His website, he's also got a list of other buying agents, because he says, look, you might not like me. You might not like look at my face. You might think my fees are too high. You might not like the sound of my voice. He said, these are all great people.
Find somebody that you trust. If somebody was to say to you, you need to chop that limb off, you'd want to trust them. You're going to spend probably the largest amount of money that you've ever spent on one item. Find some people, surround yourself with people that you trust. My sense of humor isn't universal. If you don't think I'm as funny as I think I am, the experience is going to be painful. So go out there. There are lots of people. We come in all shapes and sizes, colors and flavors. Find someone that you trust. That's what's in key.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Henry, we've taken a lot of your time. We've answered loads and loads of questions. None of us, we don't know what the future holds. But I think you and I have both been through property crashes. And I would say this, we need to be cautiously optimistic, in a sense that we've all want to be moving forward. And I think at the end of the day, what we have to be doing, successful people are always looking to move forward. There are calculated risks they have to take, but what they do is they look at the downsides, and what you try and do is minimize the downside, and don't go into property purchase or sale, whatever you're doing, with some myopic idea of only looking at the upside. Always looking to protect your downside. What if interest rates went up just 1%? What if there was a property crash of 30%? What if there was mass unemployment? What if? Doesn't mean it's all going to happen. Doesn't mean you get all depressed, but just look at the downside and then think, okay, what's the worst it can be? Okay, now, what's the upside? Agreed? Do you want to just leave us with a sort of parting shot before we finish?
Absolutely. Never bet the house.
Absolutely.
It's easy to say, just never bet the house. Stretch yourself when you've looked at the opportunities. Make sure you understand the risks you're taking, but never, particularly if you've got a family and others that depend on you, never please bet the house.
And I'll leave you with one final thought, is that if you get rid of your home mortgage, as Henry and I don't have home mortgages, if you've got no home mortgage, it's almost like you've had a pay rise, because you're no longer having to pay the man at the bank. You're no longer having to make payments. You are master of your own destiny. No one can take your hand from you. So look, thank you for being here, Henry Pryor. You are an absolute legend, rock star, Superman. Absolutely, I can't thank you enough. It's been brilliant. I know there's going to be loads and loads of replays on this. You are an icon. Thank you for spending an hour with us
Not
tonight.
at all. Thank you for having me.